All right. What's up, guys? Happy to be here with you today. Today we'll be talking about something very interesting that I believe almost all geostatisticians at some point uh had this idea in mind, which is basically how do you deal with large data sets if you have to run simulations or estimations, especially if you have a very large simulation grids and you will have to repeat you have to compute each of those simulation nodes to come well to I don't want to use complete because I used complete before, so it feels like it's redundant. But you see what I'm talking about, right? Imagine you have something big as maybe a continent, and then you have a random function which is like maybe I don't know, surface temperature. Let's say surface temperature, for example. And what should well, surface temperature is well, it's a good example, but it's not the best. But yeah, let's take surface temperature. Let's say, and then what you're trying to do is you have a continent and you want to reconstruct the surface temperature of the uh in a specific well not a specific region for the entire continent, and you define a simulation grid and you make it very fine, like you use a very fine resolution, right, so that you have so many points to compute. And imagine also the data set, the size of the data set for that type of exercise. So you have a huge data set and you have a huge amount of points to compute, right? And how do you adjust to that type of problem? Usually people call it like high dimensional problems. How do you adjust to those if you're using geostatistical methods or geostatistical simulations, right? And so today I wanted to talk about this because uh, I've been trying, or maybe, well, not trying, but I've been involved in answering that question. And what I mean by that is, I've been working on developing an algorithm that is supposed to be processing a huge data set to well, to simulate a random function for a very large simulation grid. And when I mean large, and I don't mean like, large in terms of how much space it's covering, but large in terms of how much points in that grid I have to uh, simulate, right? How many simulations do I have to complete? So that's what I mean by large. And because I'm working on that, I've been reading papers, I've been reading implementations, I've been interested in different sort of simulation methods. Some of them, of course, in Euclidean spaces, some of them in non-Euclidean spaces, some of them on second order stationary function, some of them on intrinsic random functions of an order m. Okay, whichever works fine for you, you just pick it. And what I noticed is most development try to distribute the number of computations. So let's say you have so many nodes to cover, right? Most implementations are focusing on that, like how many nodes do I have to come to simulate. And what happened is they try to distribute those into the like try to distribute those over the number of processes that are available through the hardware. So if I have a computer that has maybe a very good GPU, then they will use a GPU to distribute the computations over there. Let's say you have like 1,000 and some GPUs, right? So you can go All right, let's say I have 100,000 points. I have 1,000 cores in my GPU. I can distribute the computations over there. And because of, if, no, not because of, but if I have a good parallel architecture for my algorithm, it's gonna be smooth and then I will reduce the CPU time, right? That's one way of doing things. What happened is, most of those that decide, or maybe they go with the assumption that you can use a fixed neighboring information or a fixed local dataset to run your simulation. It's even actually even more interesting when some of those developments will say, okay, for my simulation, I will only compute the Kriging weights once and use that for the entire simulation for a specific subregion in my simulation domain, right? But I'm just thinking, those are very well interesting hypotheses or assumptions, but there are other studies saying that using that type of assumption is going to be a limitation because, sometime if you think about it, the reason why they're using that assumption is if you look at two observations very far from each other, the chances are they are not correlated to each other because of the distance between them. But in space and time, this is a very different concept. I can have, first of all, I can have covariance functions that are power function in the sense that those functions will always grow, 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 and you will never reach a level where there's no correlation anymore or there's no trend anymore between two observations very far from each other. That being said, in practice, you can always go with the assumption that, well, even if there is a correlation after a very, 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 very long lag distance between 2 points, you can assume there is no correlation. But you will have to admit that that is a limitation. So, if you look at it that way, you'll probably increase that lag distance. It's not gonna be the range. It's not gonna be something near the range. It's gonna be something bigger. And if you want to look at it in terms of how many points do I have to bring into the simulation to make it sort of consistent, you will need to grab more points. You need to enlarge your neighborhood. So as a result, you have more points to use to solve the Kriging metrics so that you can get the Kriging weights. And what happened is, if you use a direct solver, first of all, it might take longer to get the result. Second of all, secondly, you can end up having something pretty unstable because direct solver are usually um, they are related to multiplication and divisions, and so if you have to factorize something over and over and over and over and over, you might end up doing something like I'm dividing a number by zero, which is not good for your algorithm. So again, I was just thinking, no one is so far, maybe there is a publication where someone is talking about these things, but so far no one is talking about using iterative methods to solve large systems in creating algorithms. So if you want to compute the Kriging weights and you have a very large system, no one is talking about using something like Krylov subspace method to get the Kriging weights. So I was thinking, maybe we should consider using those because it has been proven that those are good, especially if I'm thinking about the Krylov method and I'm using the conjugate gradients, it's good for SPD. And I think for Kriging problems, you have SPD matrices. So it's very good. Like